So this is the Imagine Institute in Hôpital Necker. It's a brand new institute for pediatric genetic disease. And this institute is aimed at bringing together research, services, patients, and technology transfer. So it's under the same roof. We have 35,000 patients a year. And we have the privilege to have 22 state-of-the-art clinical consultations, including rehabilitation, pediatric neurology, and all different specialties. And on the top of the building, there are a number of research laboratories, 26 international laboratories, and the patient can take advantage of advances in research, and the researcher, of course, take advantage of the rare cases that we see daily in this institute. You have heard before from Isabelle Deguerre what our network of reference centers is in France. So we have at least 30 rare disease reference centers and a big deal of patients, between 20 and 30,000 a year. So it's enormous, and this is ideal for teaching, ideal for research, and ideal for technology transfer. We recruit yearly new research teams, and English is the spoken language, so no problem. If you want to apply and come, you are more than welcome. So I would like to address one point that is very dear to me, and it's the issue of impact of genetics in the diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder children. You know that this is a major issue worldwide, 1 to 200 children, a majority of boys, and I have to say that this is the first cause of consultation in our genetic institute, because families are badly asking for more explanations about what happened. And unfortunately, at least in our country, there's a limited access to current investigations and genetic counseling. So this is why families seeking an explanation to neurodevelopmental disorder is approximately 1/3 of our outpatient consultation. But despite the advance in neurogenetics, many ASD children fail to be offered the state-of-the-art investigation owing to many reasons: persistent preconceived ideas, limited access to genetic facilities, and inadequacy of consultation to children with behavioral problems. And also, I must confess that, to my view, a condition with no biological markers prompt to question its organic nature and even consider alternative etiologic scenarios. And this is why so many patients are not seen by pediatric neurologists or clinical geneticists, but rather by psychologists or psychoanalysts. And those children really fall through the net of systematic investigation. For this reason, and to improve access to services and counteract the loss of chance to be diagnosed, we have reversed the paradigm and offer on-site clinical genetic consultation to ASD children of Greater Paris area in their daycare hospital. They don't come to me, I come to them with my team. So this is a mobile genetic unit, and since 1998, we have been visiting more than 30 institutions and seen more than 600 children in their usual daycare hospital. So the medical genetic team is ambulatory, and we offer on-site consultation and service to patients, and we have a clinical geneticist, a genetic counselor, neuropsychologist, and a case manager. This is funded not by the hospitals, this is funded by the Greater Paris Regional Health Agency. It is a small budget, but very, very efficient. And because this mobile unit operates under the umbrella of our Hôpital Necker, the children that are seen on site benefit from a state-of-the-art service, including molecular cytogenetics and next-generation sequencing. So the first goal when we visit a new center is to be sure that we are accepted, well understood, and the parent consent to this on-site consultation. So there is a common presentation and then an individual consultation with the child, his parents, the child psychiatrist is present, the local team members are there, and we start with the history of the family, the history of the case, the pedigree, a clinical examination, and the patient has to be examined undressed, and many parents say that their child, their ASD child, has never been examined undressed ever. So this is very important because sometimes this is the first time that the child happened to meet with a pediatrician. Then we used to do a systematic investigation that I shall show you, and we have returned consultation to restitute the results. My questions are as follows, 5 major questions. Is it an isolated ASD or is ASD part of a syndrome? Is it a sporadic form or familial case, with or without intellectual disability? Are there exogenous factors? I shall come back to that later. And are we facing a recognizable syndrome? And also, I must say that it is very important for us to be sure that the diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder is solid, because sometimes some misdiagnosed cases of ADHD, for instance, of learning disability, are misdiagnosed, and sometimes they are found in this institution, which is absolutely inappropriate, and they are there simply because the diagnosis of ADHD or learning disability has not been done, and this is also an opportunity to correct the diagnosis and to send the child to school, because usually those children can be sent to school when the diagnosis is made and the treatment is appropriate. So we have 3 stages of investigation: standard, advanced, and research. What I want to say in one word is that we have jumped from 1998 to this year from 3% diagnosis rate to 35 to 40% diagnosis rate in 20 years. So it is enormous. It's an enormous gap to jump from 3% to 40%. And there is no one single explanation. There are hundreds of different genetic diseases that have been simply overlooked. We are pediatric geneticists. We start with examination of the case. We look at the face, the profile, the hand, the feet. It's very important. It's surprising for the child psychiatrist that we have to look at the clinical examination, but I must say that sometimes we diagnose a case simply by looking at the hand or the foot or the face. So this is part of the clinical examination, and this is most valuable. Also, we look at the picture of the children, not only the actual present pictures, but the old pictures. For a pediatric geneticist, it's not very easy to diagnose this case when he is an adolescent. But when we go back to the photo albums, it's absolutely clear that this ASD child has a condition that is very well known, that is Kabuki makeup syndrome. If I miss the right window, we can misdiagnose, and it's sometimes very difficult to diagnose a syndromic form of ASD later on in adolescent and adult. So we pay much attention to the retrospective analysis of photo albums. Then, after this clinical examination, we prescribe systematically a first line of systematic ambulatory screening examination, a metabolic workup, which the diagnostic rate is extremely low, but it is mandatory to do that at least once. And then we go for systematic Fragile X, RACGH, that replace the karyotype, and usually we do brain MRI with an MR spectroscopy. RACGH is very important because by RACGH that replaces the usual karyotype, RACGH can diagnose misapparement between repeated sequence of the genome, and sometimes you have deletion or duplication simply because of unpairing of homologous sequences. And because of the similarity between the sequences, these repeated sequences, this triggers deletion or duplication that cannot be seen by standard karyotype. This is an automatic procedure, molecular procedure, where we mixed reference DNA to the patient DNA. It's automatic, and it's very easy to analyze the result, and we usually analyze the result with the child himself or with the SIB, because it's like a game. We ask the child, he understands perfectly well, whether the line is straight or whether he or she sees a dot up or down. And it's always very interesting because the child would diagnose this condition himself or herself simply looking at the baseline, and he can say that sometimes there is a dot above the line or dots behind the line, and they are diagnosed as duplication or deletion. This is valuable because this first screening gather roughly 10 to 12% diagnosis. We have some Fragile X patients that have not been diagnosed. They were simply overlooked. Fragile X had not been done before, and they are diagnosed in the daycare hospital. Some patients had standard karyotype in the old days, but no RSAGH. And when we repeat RSAGH, then we diagnose the condition. So the first step provides the diagnosis in roughly 10 to 12% of cases. We like to do brain MRI. You will tell me, how do you do brain MRI in an autistic child? So difficult, so anxious. It's very difficult. Fortunately, we have been able to recruit anesthesists that help us doing very short sedation, anesthesia, just for the time of the brain MRI. And thanks to this very flexible system, we have been able to do 350 brain MRI in those ASD patients, done randomly in these daycare hospitals of Greater Paris, and more than 40% have an abnormal brain MRI. So this is spectacular. I'm not saying that it is specific, but the child neuroradiologist, we have the excellent team of child neuroradiologists, confirm that the brain MRI is abnormal in more than 40% of cases. Nothing is specific at this point. Maybe we have some hint of some specific features at the brain MRI, but it's still too early. But in general, we have temporal lobe anomalies or white matter hyperintensities, which are the more frequent symptoms. Then we then do the NMR spectroscopy at the end of the brain MRI, and sometimes we find a metabolic disease also overlooked, never diagnosed before, in an autistic child with dystonia and epilepsy. And the beauty of this examination is that not only do you make a diagnosis, but diagnosing a creatine deficiency in an autistic child means that you have a cure for this child, because creatine deficiency can present as a patient with neurodevelopmental disorder, epilepsy, dystonia, and we diagnose here a case where the patient has only 2 peaks on the left-hand side, while the control has 3 peaks on the right-hand side, and you can see nicely that the pink arrow shows that the creatine peak is simply missing. This child has an inborn error of creatine synthesis that is the cause of his syndromic autistic condition, and that is treatable simply by supplementing the case with oral creatine. At the end of this first stage, we have a diagnosis in a significant fraction of cases, but this is just the beginning. We have brain MRI, and we conclude that most of the diagnosed cases are atypical syndromic ASD with variable degree of intellectual disability. I want to emphasize this point. All the diagnosed cases at this stage are syndromic, atypical with ID. In other words, those screening tests are non-informative in highly performing autistic spectrum disorder children. So it's very important for your pediatric practice to know that when you are facing an ASD child with syndromic feature, intellectual disability, it's worth investigating. If, on the contrary, the guy is high-performing, no rush to investigate. Then we have to move to the second step, and this is why the Imagine Institute, that is the basis of this ambulatory clinic, is so important because of this cooperation between our hospital and the Greater Paris Daycare Hospital. We benefit from the state-of-the-art platform of investigations of the children. I mean, molecular and genetic investigation. In our Imagine Institute, we have state-of-the-art sequencing machine and computer facilities for the researcher and for the research teams, but we also use those facilities for services. So it's a mainstreaming of resources, both for research and for services. And we do either exome sequencing or panel resequencings. And I like panel sequencing for ASD. I like panel sequencing for one major reason, is that the National Health System pay for it. It is not research. It is service. And not only, it's not a gift, it's an opposable obligation of MIN to screen what is known. And sometimes we have had bad time convincing the ministers that they have to do that, and they were skeptical. And I told them, if you don't offer those tests to the children, I shall sue you, Mr. Minister, because this is an obligation of MIN to screen what is known. And so we at the first stage, we screen all the known ASD genes. There are approximately 400, and those are screened systematically. And this is very efficient because the quality of the test is extremely strong. We do not only the child, but the trio to be sure of the significance of the variants. And the cost is competitive. For 600 or 700 euros, excluding salary, we have a state-of-the-art analysis of the case, and this is half the price of one single exome. So for half the price of one single exome, I have the trio of the child and the parents, and the yield is interesting because when we screen systematically those known disease genes, we diagnose an additional 25% of cases. Interestingly, even though there are almost 400 genes, there are top 10 genes among 27, and those top 10 genes worth testing in those children. Because, for several reasons, because they are frequent, very frequent among all those cases, and because those are de novo mutations. So once you diagnose a de novo mutation in one of these genes, this is a relief for the family. It's a relief because we tell them the diagnosis and there is no risk of recurrency, and the mother can have another child, and all the family is reassured, no guilt, no stigmatization. It's a major chance. It's not a treatment, but in that case, diagnosing a condition is a treatment because it is a relief for the family. Interestingly, apart from the de novo, we have a fraction of Mendelian, including X-linked condition. And sometimes we diagnose those X-linked ASD simply by doing the pedigree when we see a familial relative, a mother relative with the same condition. And sometimes the parents are compound healthy carrier of a recessive condition, and the child has a compound autosomal recessive disease. So this is extremely valuable in 1/4 of the cases to diagnose, to reassure, and to provide a relief for the families and eventually the hope of another healthy child. Briefly, when we look at those 400 genes, there are not 400 different scenarios. There are 4 scenarios, not 400. So all those 400 fall eventually into 4 bags. And this is the beauty of system biology. We have genes involved in neuronal synapse, genes involved in signaling, then genes involved in cell proliferation and cell motility, and neural development and axogenesis. So even though this is so genetically heterogeneous, at the end of the day, the scenario, the disease scenario, are not that many. Proliferation, migration, growth process, synaptogenesis. And that's it. Before I end, I would like to remind you that it is very difficult, if you don't pay attention to the familial history, to diagnose ASD of exogenous origin. If you don't ask the mother whether she has taken valproate because she's epileptic, or whether she was addict and took drugs by the time of the pregnancy, if you don't ask the question, you will never know that this ASD child is suffer from the maternal intoxication, from a drug, from addiction. And really, valproic acid mimics magnificently autistic spectrum disorder children. This is a drug that is used by the pediatric neurologists and adult neurologists for many excellent indications. Also, the psychiatrists used to prescribe this condition. But 10% of the children exposed to valproate during pregnancy eventually develop ASD, and 40% develop intellectual disability. So it's very important by the time of the clinical examination and first discussion with the family to know more about the history of the pregnancy of the mother. And sometimes the mother would disclose to us information that they've never disclosed to the child psychiatrist before. It's very interesting. They don't say the same thing to the child psychiatrist or to the pediatric geneticist. And sometimes the child psychiatrists who attend the consultation are amazed of what the family would say to a geneticist and that they would not say to the child psychiatrist. And this is very interesting and important to refer. Before I end, I would like to tell you that there is another 65% of cases. So if 35% are genetic conditions, what are the 65% remaining? This is the field for research. This is the field for the future. Can be mutation in uninvestigated disease gene, in non-coding region, on the double helix, somewhere else, in an area that has not been investigated, but also, it's also possible that epigenetic causes are involved. Because, as you know, the double helix is not packed in the cell. It's, in fact, wrapped up on histones and a nucleosome so as to make the double helix open or closed. So suppose that a double helix is mutated, and this is the mutation that we have found, or simply wrapped and closed by epigenetic mechanisms like acetylation, methylation, whatever, this can result in the same consequence, the lack of gene product. So the child can lack the gene product, or the gene can be simply closed, not open for gene expression. And this is an entirely brand new field of research for the 65% of cases that are unexplained. Are there other genes with not known mutation, or are there epigenetic mechanisms, as we have seen for valproic acid and addiction? And really, with the common environment of the pregnant mother today, I would not be surprised to learn that some other, still unknown, environmental factors are involved in those other 65% cases. I would like to conclude in 3 short slides that sum up what I wanted to share with you. ASD is not a disease, it is a symptom. We can find, when we search for, we can find an explanation in 30 to 35% of cases if we implement the mandatory examination. If you don't do that, you never find anything, of course. But when you implement this state-of-the-art investigation, you diagnose one-third of the cases. Most of the cases are de novo, copy number variant, cytogenetic anomalies, or mutation, and this is, again, a relief for the family. Those diagnosed cases are mostly syndromic, atypical with intellectual disability. Brain MRI, RSEGH, and next-generation sequencing has made a difference in the last couple of years. And here you see the impact of new tools and new techniques in our diagnostic capacity. And this is, I think, why Isabel wanted me to come today to share with you the impact of new technology in the diagnosis of this condition and other conditions as well. So please, if you don't investigate high-performing children, please investigate the atypical syndromic form of ASD with intellectual disability. This is extremely worthy. My second condition, as Hippocrates used to say, there is no holy disease. No disease is holy. The child with ASD deserves investigation. And diagnosing a condition is not a stigmatization, as some psychiatrists say or believe. It is not a stigma. It is never a stigmatization. It's a relief because it helps the parent thinking, overcoming the hardship. Also, we are at the point of launching the first clinical trial based on the disease mechanism. Evidence-based clinical trial, once we know the disease mechanism, then we can address properly the condition. So this is very important to diagnose, not only as a relief, but this is the key for the ongoing clinical trial. If you don't diagnose, you cannot hope to include in a therapeutic trial, of course. And this is not a reason not to collaborate, all the contrary. It's extremely important to collaborate with the child psychiatrist and psychotherapist because this cause, when we find it, does not preclude psychotherapy and other excellent care from those professionals. And even it opens new opportunities. Provided that we have mutual respect, mobilization, and mutual adhesion between professionals. My last slide is, again, to encourage you to investigate your ASD children, especially when they are syndromic and with intellectual disability, to ban ideologies. And in France, we have suffered from generations of ideology regarding the disease mechanism of autism. And we have to ban ideology, dogmatism, and demonization. This is stupid. Worse, the worst fighting like that. And the patients and the parents are so motivated and eager to know more about the disease mechanism. So we have to be respectful for the child psychiatrists and the colleagues, but we have to hear that the parents are badly asking and demanding more information about the disease mechanism of the child. And this is, of course, a prerequisite for future research. And it's perfectly conceivable that at the end of the day, various mechanisms, either genetics or immunological or even psychodynamic, could eventually lead to similar consequences. Thank you for your attention.